All right. Hello, my name is Kai JC, and today we're going to talk about the history of JRPGs. So we're going to talk about the formation of the genre and stuff that maybe we can learn from, or stuff that, learning about the stuff that was in their mindset at the time. So, role-playing game turns 50 this year. As of 2024, role-playing games have been out and been around and been playable since 1974. We'll get into Japan in a moment, so please bear with me. What is an RPG? RPGs are inspired by Dungeons & Dragons, basically. So after Dungeons & Dragons was released in 1974, computer science students, professors, and a whole bunch of other people started immediately making fan games, immediately making video games, immediately trying to say, hey, let's use computers to make this a better experience, right? A lot of these games were for mainframe computers, like the big computers that be doing all the number crunching and stuff, or be doing a lot of other stuff back then. All these games were distributed for free amongst coworkers and colleagues. And the last fun fact I want to say is a lot of these games were inspired by Lord of the Rings, hence the Moria game and title screen. So this is actually the first game with the title screen, by the way. Was an RPG game from 1975. Yes, these games were simple, but they were the first, and they were very like one of the first, probably one of the first trends in gaming too. And it's crazy to read because all these people from all around the world who didn't even know each other would play Dungeons and Dragons, be like, you know what, perfect idea for a game, and then they would just make it into a game before most people even had games, right? So this is a very, very interesting time. Okay, but what the heck even is an RPG? So the CRPG Addict, which is a website that I read frequently and use a lot in the research in this document, is a critical reviewer of thousands of RPG games, came up with four things. So like I said, or like I want to say, the RPG is kind of an evolving term. It's kind of a catch-all term for a whole lot of games. And I want to say this is the baseline I wanted to set for this presentation. Most of the games we talk about are gonna fit these bills, but some of them won't. That's how it is. But I just wanted to say this is what an RPG is. Provide some definition. So remember this. Take a screenshot, write it down. Four things. Throughout the game, the character could become stronger, more resilient, and more capable in overcoming the game's challenges during combat. That means as you play the game, you get stronger. Second one, the character development must be separate from inventory acquisition. So you must have something intrinsic to your character that has nothing to do with getting items, but more to do with you just becoming stronger and your ability set evolving with the tides of the game. Such character development must not solely consist of improvements to maximum health, so you can't just get HP. You have to get stuff like more attack power, more magic power, more stamina, more so all the stats you would consider for an RPG game, those stats have to be affected as well. Players must have some control over the rate and details of development, so the player must be in control of how the grind is, basically. If I say I don't want to grind right now, that should be my right. Or if I'm saying I want to level this way, I want to level that way, that should also be something that's taken into account. Why do you care? A lot of the RPG elements that got started in these early mainframe computer games have slowly bled into many, many other genres. I'm sure you can think of at least a dozen games that aren't RPGs that have inventory and stat management, level up systems, and NPCs to talk to. Many RPGs included these elements, but only some were successful. Let's talk about them. So, one other genre I wanted to mention quite quickly is called adventure games. Now, adventure games came out around the same time as Dungeons & Dragons, but they're not fully inspired by Dungeons & Dragons. A lot of them are, though. And it's not necessarily about grinding, but more so about telling a story, exploring the world, and solving puzzles. So, they have really, really helped influence the RPG genre. Because over time, people wanted to do more with the worlds they were building in these RPG games, and they looked to adventure games for ideas on how to build that world. And they just kind of had an intersection, and over time, that's how we get these RPG games with these really thought out stories, these interactive worlds, these silly fun characters to talk to. That's where that intersection is right there. So in the beginning, the adventure games were text based because the computers didn't all have graphics displays back then. So it was just they describe the environment, you enter in what your action is, the computer says, okay, this happened. So if I say, examine the mailbox, the computer says, small mailbox is closed. I want to say, open the mailbox, and then you open the mailbox, and you can take what's inside, right? So just putting it in text form what you would be doing in a real environment. So let's talk about two major games that inspired the gaming landscape in the late 70s and early 80s. So the first game is Ultima. Now, Ultima started off as a game called Calibeth, which is from 1979, and it was made by a guy named Richard Garriott, and it has a whole bunch of new ideas that were very new to gaming at the time. So the first one is the idea of a grid-based overworld. So if you play something like Pokemon, play something like Dragon Quest, early Dragon Quest, um, Octopath might have this too. I don't really remember. Actually, no, it doesn't. But I mean, a lot of the games do have grid-based movement, and that means the game world is organized in tiles. Stuff like it has turn-based combat on the overworld, so you could like kind of like a strategy RPG almost, but not fully, right? You could attack stuff that's in the overworld. You can go into dungeons and walk around in first person. You can attack stuff in the dungeon. That's a different battle system. Um, yeah, there's NPCs. There's towns you can go into. There's shops you can buy from. NPCs talk to you. They give you information. NPCs say stuff that's useless. They goof off. It builds up the sort of environment that he was working on. It was very, very successful, very unique game, and it inspired a whole bunch of developers. So then the next game we have to talk about is Wizardry. Now, Wizardry was a competitor to Ultima, started in 1981, and the developers of Wizardry wanted to commercialize the mainframe games they played in the late 70s that we spoke about in the beginning. So, in essence, it's a first-person dungeon crawler with the character creation. It's got dice rolling for stats, and it's got very unforgiving combat. Fun fact, this game was so popular in Japan that a Japanese company bought the intellectual property rights in the early 2000s and made a lot of the more recent games JRPGs, extremely, extremely, extremely influential series. So this is a screenshot of a newer Wizardry remake. So it's a remake of the original um, Mad Overlord. What's it called? Proving Grounds of the Mad Overlord, I think. I don't know. It's the remake of the original Wizardry game from 1981, and as you can see, you have the graphics from the original Apple II version of the game, and then in the back we have the 3D modern remade version of it. It's on Steam, it's on Switch, it's on everything. I haven't played it yet, but that's what it looks like. So, gaming in the 70s and the 80s. We're going to talk about hardware for a second. So, computers. Most of the early JRPGs were programmed in BASIC, which is both slow and inefficient. When you type in a basic program, the basic program, one, is stored in RAM, and two, when it runs, each command in the program is being interpreted and then executed on by the computer itself, and that interpretation process also takes RAM. So you have this program which is not very efficient memory-wise. It's taking up all the memory the computer has. It's being stored on these tapes that take 10 minutes to an hour to load on, and when you load it, that's it. You can't really do anything else with memory unless you want to load more, which you already have a program that may or may not take up all the memory you have. So it's like very, very inefficient, very slow, but it's also the programming language itself is not that hard. So that's kind of the draw. When you have a complicated program, it helps to have a programming language that doesn't turn your brain into mush. And there's no computer standards at all. So every computer had different memory, every computer had different processor. Partially, not really. Every computer had different processors, different OS, different input output, no standards. So choosing which computer to support was very, very important about what type of game you were going to make, who you were going to sell it to. This is the NEC PC 8001 from Japan. I mean, we have right here this is the main drive. This is just the tape drive, and a lot of the games that actually came out for this computer required a RAM expansion, so they required an extra 16K of RAM for it to work. Because regular 16K is not enough, you need 32. What does that have to do with JRPGs? Many early JRPG companies started off as computer stores or computer-related businesses. So Neon Falcon started in 1981 as a computer store. Micro Cabin started in 1982. Micro meaning microcomputer, which is another word for home computer, and cabin meaning house. So microcomputer cabin. Square, that started out as I think a computer cafe, so you can come in and use the computers. These companies use this to their advantage, right? So people who were interested in computers were obviously a little nerdy. They knew how to use it. a lot of them came in to make games. So they'd be making their games, and these companies would be like, "Oh snap, you know how to make games? Maybe we should get a publishing deal going because I sell computers, you do games. We could help each other out." And that eventually turned into, let's start a game company, let's focus on games. And Nihon Falcom still in business, Square Enix still in business, Microcabin, I think they got bought out, but their games are very influential. Retro gaming, RPG gaming comes to Japan. So let's talk about some of the first games. The first are the oldest RPG games that we know. Now there are a few caveats with this, right? So you see these names, Koei, these are the oldest ones on the list, or this one's the oldest one on the list. And we don't have any evidence of RPG games being made and designed in Japan at this time. So, Koei's a big company, so, we don't really, we don't know. The reality is we don't really know anything from before this time. So the first one is a game called Underground Exploration, which is made by Yoichi Arikawa, who's the current CEO of Koei Tecmo and the co-founder. This game doesn't have all the RPG elements, but the ones that it does have is it have NPCs to talk to, towns to visit. You have a party of people to manage. You have grid-based movement, so you can move on a really, really, really big overworld map. Sort of overworld. I want to say each world is like a dungeon. Each dungeon has towns and stuff in it, and you have to kill all the monsters in the dungeon. I can't play this game because I don't speak Japanese, but that's what I'm told and what I've seen of the gameplay. Very, very rough game, but from what I've described, I'm sure you can see the parallels between RPG games and this. Next game we have is called Dragon and Princess. Now, Dragon and Princess, since Underground Exploration doesn't have all the elements of an RPG, Dragon and Princess absolutely does. So half of it is a text adventure game, like what we spoke about before, and the other half is a strategy RPG game, like Fire Emblem. And it was probably made by Arikawa. I'm not fully sure, because he's known to use different pseudonyms, and pseudonyms, and he was still a publishing company, so he could have been publishing stuff. We don't know. But yeah, that's Dragon and Princess. This is the first JRPG that we know is okay. This passes for an RPG by our modern definition, and it's the oldest one we know. So another one is called Spy Daisakusen. It is an adaptation of the Mission Impossible television show from the 1960s, and it was advertised as a role-playing game, even though the game is mostly just straight up RNG. There isn't really much skill to it. The last game I want to talk about is Dragon Lair. Dragon Lair is a pretty mysterious game. It was made by an American couple named John and Patty Bell. Made a bunch of similar games during that era, in 1981, 1982. And this is one of their last projects, and we don't know who programmed, we don't know if they programmed the game or, what level of involvement was Fugan Electronics in, was Fugan Electronics participating in the development of the game. We don't know, but it's an action RPG, and it's probably the first action RPG that we know about that came out of Japan. All these games are for the PC 8001 computer and the PC 8801 computer. I think Dragon Lair may have came out on the SharpX one as well. I'm not sure. So we spoke about these games. There's some interesting first steps, but let's talk about inspiration. 1983, Koei made this game called Dungeon. Look at that. Look at that cover art. Now look at this. What do we have? A grid-based movement, and first-person dungeons. Where do we see that in? We saw this in Ultima. So again, Dungeon is a game that is based on, very much inspired by the Ultima games. Next game, Mugen no Shinzo, right? Which I think means Heart of Fantasy. Heart of Fantasy. And it's by a company called Extalsoft. I don't speak Japanese, by the way. I don't speak Japanese, and there's a few of these games I haven't played, so this is information I've accumulated over the years and over the time I spent researching this. So another game called Mugen no Shinzo, which was another big game of the time, was a first-person dungeon crawler similar to Wizardry with, grid-based movement, so similar to both of them games. One of the cool things about it is it has really, really nice character art. So these are the type of enemies you'll be fighting. Pretty cool, right? So, Inspiration Station. So, the last game I want to talk about for inspiration is called Black Onyx. Now, Black Onyx is a Wizardry-style dungeon crawler. One of the really cool things about it is that you can recruit some people in, I think, in the first dungeon. Similar to some other games that we may or may not know, that we'll talk about in a minute. Yeah, you could talk to people, recruit them, get your party up. Um, People used to say it was the first JRPG ever because information was hard to find. But we spoke about a few RPGs, so this game has a pretty cool story. You should check it out. Action takes traction. So we spoke about a lot of these turn-based games. Now let's talk about action games. So in 1984, Namco released Juraga no Tower Juraga. Now Tower Juraga is an arcade game that all the other games I spoke about are computer games, desktop computer games. Computers, not super accessible. Computers, very expensive. Um, Arcades is something anyone could just go into. Arcades are everyone knows about arcades. You go into an arcade, you put your money in, you play a game. So this was an RPG called Tower Druaga, and it's very simplified. It's very very basic. Well, I don't want to say it's basic. It's actually kind of a really really long and confusing game, and it's so long and so confusing that it became a cultural moment, right? So people were going to play the game. They were writing down notes, sharing notes with each other, and in mass over time, these notes would just accumulate, and then they beat the game together. So that was a very very popular game back in the day and was very very influential. Um, Action takes traction. Highlight. Highlight has a similar battle system to Tower Druaga, but is much smaller, much simpler, and shorter in scope. Very successful in Japan, but this is a computer game, not an arcade game, and it sold very poorly. And it was not that successful in the United States because it came to America much later, where the gameplay styles had changed. So this game came out in 1984 in Japan as a computer game, and came out in 1989 in America as a console game. So gameplay styles and gameplay, what was expected from games had changed so much. You put this game in, it feels old. So that's why it wasn't that successful over here. The last game I want to talk about. Oh, Tower Druaga has a great anime. You should watch it. It's good. No one talks about it. Um, the last game I want to talk to you about is called in the action game section. It's called Dragon Slayer 2 Xanadu. Now, Dragon Slayer 2 is it was so popular when it came out. It sold over 400,000 copies, which, according to Falcom and some other sources, was one of the top-selling Japanese PC games for many years. Enemies, but one of the thing about this is that the game is very, very esoteric. So, what does that mean? Is that not many people have beaten the game. There's so many little things you have to do to do stuff right. And everything you do in the game is basically permanent, right? So if you kill an enemy, the enemy stays dead. And there's a fixed number of enemies in the game. There's a fixed number of resources you can gather. So if you kill all the enemies and spend all your money on um like like certain items like food, if you spend all your money on food, which you have to eat in this game, you will basically soft lock yourself because you didn't buy the right items or you didn't buy the right spells that will make the game beatable. So it's one of those games. But it was such a weird game and such a weird puzzle to unravel that it was still very, very popular. One of the first people that actually beaten this game on record is Masahiro Sakurai. So this is they used to give out a card to people who say, "Hey, I beat the game," and they give you out a card. They show you off. Hey, look who beat our game, right? So that's pretty cool. So, quick story about Falcom, which made Xanadu. Um, Ultima, like I said, was very popular in Japan, but the games hadn't really been fully localized yet. People were playing them in English. People were importing them and playing them. So, oh, if I didn't mention before, a lot of the computer stores were importing American computers. So that's why they were kind of one of the reasons why a lot of these game companies were inspired by Western RPGs. Also, so back to the story. Falcom was talked at Richard Garriott saying, "Hey, we want to localize your games for Japan. Let's get a deal." So Richard Garriott flew to Japan. They're showing off all the Falcom games, and they go to these scenes, and some of the character portraits in Xanadu are actually copied from the manual for Ultima 3. Richard Garriott's like, "What the heck? You stole my work." He left. There was a lawsuit, and there was a settlement saying, "Okay, you can't use this art in the game anymore." Now, fast forward to today, where you can go on the Switch eShop. Look what's still there. Art's still there. You can go on the Switch eShop and pick this up today. And, look at this art, which is kind of funny. But yeah, that deal fell through, and that could have been an interesting deal because both companies, both people went on to innovate in the RPG space. So, aside, the first console JRPG. So the first console JRPG was Bokoska Wars from 1984. It came to the Nintendo Entertainment System in December of 1985. It's a really weird game. I don't want to get into the gameplay right now because it's so weird, but it's very, very unique, very, very silly. But it's part real time, part turn based, part strategy. I don't know how you combine all these genres, and it doesn't really work, but it's fun to bungle through. Dragon Quest. Before we finally hit it, we finally hit Dragon Quest, 1986. Not immediately super successful, but after a year's worth of advertising, it became a super hit. So Dragon Quest is a Famicom game, and it was designed to be a Nintendo Famicom game, Nintendo Entertainment System game. And of all the games we talked about before, this one was actually designed to be a Nintendo game. And what makes that significant is that the Nintendo, being a console game, simplifies a lot of the stuff that you would have to do in a computer game, right? So a lot of these computer games, you're bungling through menus, you're remembering key combinations, you're remembering all this extra stuff. You have to take notes. That's too much work. I want to play a game. I don't want to do my homework. So that's why Dragon Quest was popular. The art style was fun and poppy and not like, kind of brooding like a lot of the fantasy art was at the time. We have Akira Toriyama's art, which was like very, Dragon Ball was already popular. So a lot of kids saw the game, they played it, and it became a smash hit. Um, so next game let's talk about is Zelda, Legend of Zelda. So Zelda is one of those games that, a lot of people don't think it's an RPG. Probably doesn't hit all the bars, but Miyamoto himself didn't think it was an RPG. He was the head designer on the game. Um, but it was inspired by many RPGs, and it popularized a sword swinging mechanic. So, when you swing a sword, a lot of the games I talked about before that didn't have that. I don't think any of them had, but this is the first game that has it that I've spoken about. And it made RPG combat, if you look on YouTube today, how to make an RPG, you're going to see Zelda stuff because, like, the idea of swinging a sword and hitting stuff is so ingrained into the popular conscience of what an RPG represents, right? So this obviously had an effect. Though Dragon Buster probably did it first. So if we look at this interview that he did, influenced by games like Black Onyx and Ultima. So, the inspiration was there. So it's based on RPGs, right? So this is a very big development. So in 1987, we have this game called Ancient East Spanish. This is again another Falcom game, and it was designed to kind of similar to Dragon Quest, similar to Zelda, designed to kind of strip away a lot of the intense stuff about RPGs and make the genre more approachable. This is still a computer game, but it has a story that's easy to digest. It has interesting characters that are memorable. It has music, which is so good that it kind of jump-started the video game music industry. Like, this game has albums based on it, even though it's from 1987. It kind of kick-started Falcom into like, okay, we're going to start releasing albums. It made it 5 months. It uses a bump combat system, which is a bit older than the sword swinging system, but it's very, very good in this game. I like it a lot. Yeah, good game, good game. If there's any game you haven't heard of in the series and you haven't heard of this one, play it because it has many remakes and it is on Steam and it has the graphics and everything got refined. Check it out. It's very, very fun. Games you know. So we talked about a whole bunch of old games. Now let's talk about the games you might know about. So first game let's talk about is Final Fantasy. So it was designed by Hironobu Sakaguchi to defeat Dragon Quest. Though it wasn't that successful in Japan, but it was. I'm not saying it wasn't successful. It wasn't a flop, but it was more successful in America. And I'm pretty sure that's self-evident to people who like RPGs a lot. Final Fantasy is everywhere over here. It was programmed by famed programmer Nasir Gabelli, who made so many little optimizations to the code, which are really, really interesting to read up on if you ever get into that. Square did not initially believe in this game, so it didn't really get much internal support in terms of development. So a lot of people, it started off with a very, very small team of developers, but over time, more people joined the project. That just seemed really cool. In 1989, the Final Fantasy series actually released the first handheld RPG. So the first Game Boy RPG, Final Fantasy Legend, not Adventure, Final Fantasy Legend. Yeah, that's the first handheld RPG. And handhelds are a whole different market, and there's a whole bunch of RPGs on there that made a very big splash that I think you guys know about. This started that trend. So next game we're going to talk about is Persona. Persona started from this book series called Digital Devil Story Megami Tensei, which means Digital Devil Story Reincarnation of the Goddess, which is a horror fantasy series by a guy named Aya Nishitani. It's kind of crazy, but it's really, really good if you're into horror. It's a Famicom game that was made by. It started off as, I mean, there's two games, right? So there's a computer game made by a company called Nihon Telenet, which is its own thing. But there's a Famicom game made by a company called Atlas, which you may know. Plays very similar to Wizardry, but includes stuff like demon capture and demon summoning for battles, demon negotiation. Um, so you have this like beast element where you're catching these creatures, you're bringing them into your party somehow by negotiating with them some terms, um, or RPG, right? There's the role play by negotiating with them to come onto your party, and you're using them as party members to fight in battles. Um, the game was very successful, and there's after many sequels that became the Persona series, which was spin off from 1996 that became its own thing. So yes, Shin Megami Tensei, love that series. And the last game I want to talk to you about is The Legend of Heroes. Now, Legend of Heroes series, there's many games in the series if you heard of it. Trails in the Sky, Trails into Azure. What else? Trails into Daybreak. That one's about to come out. It started off as a ripoff of an Apple II game called Caverns of Free Tag. Caverns of Free Tag, I don't think it did very well. It's basically a forgotten game, but that got turned into a game called Dragon Slayer. Dragon Slayer was popular. Dragon Slayer 2 was actually called Dragon Slayer 2 Xanadu, which we know sold numbers. So, the same game reinterpreted in a different area was a super success. And it has release going back to 1984, which is the original Dragon Slayer, and has planned releases into the 2030s, right? So that's already like 50 years. Its own 50 years old. This is going to be a 50-year long gaming series if it survives to that long. So, yep, that's Legend of Heroes. So these are my sources. Yep. So thank you for watching my. That concludes my JRPG presentation. I hope you learned something interesting. A lot of these games are really, really cool, really, really interesting. You should totally play Ancient East Vanished. You can just look it up on Steam, East Chronicles. I love gaming. I hope you guys have a good day. Thank you for watching.